available on our website. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to type it in the Q&A box or the chat window, and they'll be answered once the presentation is over. If you can't connect to the webinar or the audio portion is giving you difficulties, please let me know or reconnect using the instructions provided in the email. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Brian.
Thank you, Avi. This is Brian Bueling, and thanks for joining. As Avi mentioned, the topic today is going to be overcoming objections from DITA Naysayers. And just to give you a little bit of background before we get into the details, this is the second of 3 webinars that are given in succession, with the intent of trying to help people not so much understand what DITA is, it's been around for a long time, or really understand technically how it works, or technically what the advantages of single source publishing. But once you have the sense that DITA is a good solution for your organization, maybe you've downloaded XMetal, you've looked at how the editing interface and how to publish the DITA Open Toolkit, we've seen that a lot of organizations, a lot of people, especially from technical writing or IT backgrounds, have had problems getting that concept pushed outside of the technical publications group. So we thought there were like 3 main problems that we wanted to address. As I mentioned before, this is the second webinar. Last month, we focused on really one of the biggest problems, which is just getting, in general, projects approved for structured writing, single source publishing, and really DITA in particular. That webinar is recorded. It's available on our website and XML as well. And this is really the second step. So you have enough interest where something needs to be done, but there's some resistance to DITA in particular. And we're seeing this, honestly, this is becoming less and less of an issue. Sometimes it's the point that DITA as a standard is being hurt by it's being oversold by vendors that have made commitments to it from an editing or content management or even publishing perspective. But this is the second step of the process. We'll talk a little bit about getting projects approved in general, to get something to be done, and this is the second step. It's how to implement it. Next month we'll be talking about how to actually measure the cost savings and overall improvements of your system once you have moved over to a DITA environment. So the first webinar was techniques for getting projects approved. This is overcoming objections to DITA as a particular implementation technique. And then next month we'll be talking about DITA metrics and measuring the cost savings and overall productivity improvements. So we have an hour together. So we just want to provide a little bit of background. We're assuming, again, that you know what DITA is, you know what XML is, you know how structured writing can be applied to a single-source publishing system. But we want to provide a working definition of what we mean by a DITA publishing system, and then provide a quick overview of what we mean by the architectural components. But the main focus is going to be a third point, as we talk about the implementation details and the inevitable resistance you're going to get by moving from something that's not the architecture that we're going to introduce to it. Throughout these sessions, there's a couple of opportunities to ask questions via some controlled polls that we're going to be asking of you guys. But because of the relative number of people, we'd like to have most of the questions that can be submitted via chat to the panelists to be saved towards the end. I think we'll end maybe 5-10 minutes before the end of the hour. We'll officially end at the hour, but Avi and I will be on. If there's more questions that need to be submitted, we can stay on for 10-15 minutes. However, we've had some success is if we go across a particular slide, I can see the questions that are being posed, and so you don't, although we might not address them to the end, you can feel free to submit them as we're at that slide, just so you don't forget. And if it's particularly relevant, I might address it right at that time. So a little bit about Dakota. We've been working with XMetal since before they were even part of JUT Systems. It's one of the key components of an XML-based and DITA-based publishing environment. You have to have some environment to edit your new content in DITA or XML. The other two areas are content management system and then some way of publishing. That encompass with the training, the technical support, and data conversion really is what Dakota Systems provide. We don't really develop any type of editing, content management, or like XSLFO publishing technology, but what we see most of the success isn't so much choosing one component or another, it's stringing everything together and making sure the expectations are set with the timing of the way you roll out a system. And so we've been doing this for a long time, and the need for these types of systems continue to grow outside of traditional technical publishing. It's the same techniques that we're introducing here are used. There's no geographic focus, and there's really no industry focus either. We're amazed at the uses of DITA in legal services, financial services, commercial publishing. Although it's been designed for technical publishers, because of the adoption of all the software around it, it's been used in many different industries. Although our core has been technical development, we've seen, as you can imagine, over the last 8-9 years that people don't want to pay for people to develop. They want to learn how to do it themselves. So we included training services 2004. And then with this kind of trend of outsourcing either the support or the actual hosting of the services, we've introduced that a couple of years ago as well. As I mentioned before, DITA in particular, XML publishing and XMetal is used, although the focus oftentimes is in manufacturing or electronic software documentation. We see uses in commercial publishing, government education, and other. It's important to note that maybe 5 years ago, DITA was a growing but small part of what we do, but over the last a couple years in particular, we see that in many cases it's the default implementation for many new projects. Where we see the resistance, and we'll get into in a little bit, is when there's been early adopters of XML publishing and they already have a standard in place, or maybe they're not so much just in the traditional technical publications realm. But it's important to know that what we're talking about in DITA for tech pubs is applied to other industries and applications as well. And as Avi mentioned, my name is Brian Bueling. I'm the Managing Director of Dakota Systems. My role in general is to make sure that our new implementations have the right moving pieces, to make sure they have the right software components. So if you get that foundation right, with the right XML standard, the right editing software, the right CMS, the right publishing, you're 80% of the way there. Okay, so getting into, for those of you that, for every 50 that are on the phone that have sat through dozens of these presentations, that they know about DITA, they've worked with it, there's one or two that it might still be new to. And for those of you that worked with structured writing and single source systems, 90% of what's in DITA isn't new. It's been around since you've heard component-based writing, database publishing, publishing automation, XML authoring. The terms have changed throughout the years. DITA is one application that everyone seems to have agreed to from the software community, and the way that it handles topical reuse, the way it handles content references is less important than the overall structural approach. So we're not going to get into the technical details of DITA. There's plenty of resources from it. But if you are brand new to it, everything that you've learned about component-based writing in the past, everything you've learned about structured writing or single-source publishing, all of it applies to DITA. DITA is one XML schema that implements all the concepts that you've heard about for a long time. And it's important, too, when we introduce DITA, it's a DITA publishing environment. I know it's an XML standard, but what you're really talking about when you're moving to DITA publishing is more than just the standard itself. It's more than just coming up with the way that you're going to use the DTD or the schema. What you're really talking about is a system. And it's a system that comprises, and we'll show a visual representation in a second, but you're talking about software and hardware components. There's editing software that has to either be modified or purchased. This is why we've worked so closely with XMetal. There's a content management system that has to manage the DITA maps and the topics, the content references. And then there's publishing. Once you convert everything to DITA, you have no formatting associated with it, so you have to have some way of publishing it. So we're dealing with a system that actually enforces content. You're not converting to it. It validates every step along the way when you're editing and when you're storing it in your database. And you're using DITA. You're not converting to DITA just for publishing. And the whole purpose of this is so documents can be reused across different formats, like a website or a PDF, or different document outputs. You have profiled versions, maybe for a teacher, maybe for the student, maybe for an advanced installation guide, and maybe for a user guide. And that come from the same content. So when we talk about overcoming objections to DITA naysayers, it's objections to this. It's always a system that looks like this. And I'm amazed as I go through the years looking at our partners, looking at our implementations, looking at architectural diagrams, how similar this model has been maintained over the years. There's always different groups of content contributors. There's separate software, even to this day, that comes from a specialized vendor for editing that's very good at creating the DITA output. Just Systems is a great example of that. But they don't build the content repository software. There's a separate software component that has to be purchased and integrated with for the content repository. And then there's separate software for publishing the XSLFO, the websites, now ebook, iOS applications, Android applications. They're becoming the big push. So what we're talking about is moving to an environment like this. And it doesn't really matter where you are right now. You might even be overcoming objections to DITA naysayers might be very applicable to you, even if you're already using DITA, because you might be in a position where you already have XMetal. You're creating content, and maybe you're using DITA Open Toolkit off of a file system, but then you want to move to a content repository, and you'll see some resistance. So as you all know, the more these characteristics are applicable, the more DITA is a valuable alternative for you. The more multiple formats you have, the higher number of formats you have, the larger volume, the more complex they are, the more opportunities for reuse, the more languages that you convert to, the more you can't sell one of your products without the documentation, the more critical it's linked to the production process, the more it's a good fit. And so before you go through the implementation process to try to get DITA to work from a technical perspective, you should use this list to kind of cross-check how many languages do we have, what's the opportunity for reuse, what's the volume of content, how complex are they in terms of tables and linking, and then how many outputs are we